Rain hit the metal roof of the docking bay on Colony Base 9, and nobody paid it any attention. War did not care about weather, and neither did the people preparing for it. In the lower hangar, engineers moved fast around a battered old warship called the Ashwood, welding cracked plates and checking wires that had been replaced more times than anyone could count. The ship was old, tired, and had seen more battles than most fleets ever would. Above the atmosphere, 12 alien warships dropped out of jump space in a tight formation. They belonged to the Coalition, a union of several alien species that had been slowly pushing human territory back for years. Leading the attack was Commander Rill, a calm and confident officer from a species known for patience and precision. He had studied human tactics for a long time and expected this to be a short, clean battle. The Ashwood, according to his scans, was outdated, underpowered, and alone. Rill opened a channel to his fleet. "Target the lone vessel. Disable its engines first. We take it intact if possible." Down on the ship, Captain Daniel Reyes stood near the control console, arms crossed, watching the alien fleet approach on the main screen. He was not young anymore, and his uniform had faded patches where old ranks used to be. Beside him, his second-in-command, Priya Nandi, tightened her grip on the edge of the console. 12 ships, she said quietly. "That's not a patrol, that's an execution." "Then we make it expensive," Reyes replied without raising his voice. He turned to the crew. Most of them were young, some barely out of training, but their eyes were steady. Reyes had learned long ago that fear was normal, but panic was a choice, and he refused to let his people choose it. "Power down anything we don't need," he ordered. "Life support, minimum lighting, non-essential systems. Everything goes into shields and hull integrity. We are not running today." The ship shuddered as the Coalition fleet opened fire. Beams of orange energy tore through space and struck the Ashwood's outer plating. Alarms rang through the corridors. Sparks flew from overloaded panels. The ship rocked hard, throwing crew members against their stations, but it held. On Rill's flagship, sensors registered a strange delay in the ship's power failure rate. According to the models, the Ashwood's shield should have already collapsed. Rill frowned, watching the numbers shift on his display. "Status?" he asked his tactical officer. "Their shields are down to 40% but holding steady. No breach yet." Rill's antennae twitched, a sign of curiosity among his kind. "Increase output. Target their central hull directly." The next volley was heavier. The Ashwood groaned under the strain, and several sections lost power completely. In the lower decks, an engineer named Owen Baxter worked fast, rerouting a burned-out relay by hand while sparks rained down around him. "Come on, old girl," he muttered, tightening a bolt with shaking fingers. "Just a little longer." Back on the bridge, Reyes gripped the edge of his chair as another impact rattled the ship. Warning lights flashed red across every panel. "Hull integrity at 62%, Priya reported. "Reactors holding but barely." "Keep the shields angled toward their main fleet," Reyes said. "Let the aft plating absorb the rest." The crew worked in tight coordination, adjusting power flow manually as automated systems failed one by one. It was not clean or efficient. It was rough, desperate work, held together by training and stubbornness rather than advanced technology. Yet somehow, the ship kept moving, kept firing back, and kept surviving. Aboard his flagship, Rill watched the battle unfold with growing unease. According to every calculation his people had ever made about human ships, the Ashwood should have been destroyed several times over already. Instead, it fired back with steady, calculated bursts, striking two of his escort ships hard enough to disable their shields. "This is not possible," Rill said quietly to himself. His science officer, a young Coalition engineer named Vesa, studied the data streaming across her console. She had joined the fleet only a few months earlier, still eager to understand alien species beyond textbooks and reports. She noticed something odd in the pattern of the Ashwood's power distribution. Commander, she said, their power output keeps shifting. It's not consistent with any known energy system. It's almost like they're improvising in real time. Rill turned to her. Explain. I think they're manually adjusting everything, Vesa said. No automated system reacts this unpredictably. It's like watching a living thing adapt, not a machine following code. Rill considered this for a long moment. He had fought other species before, species that surrendered when their technology reached its limits. Humans, it seemed, did not follow that pattern. Continue the assault, he ordered finally, but target their weapon systems only. I want that ship disabled, not destroyed. As the bombardment intensified, the Ashwood shook violently under the pressure. Sparks rained from the ceiling in several sections. Somewhere below, Owen Baxter shouted for another engineer to help stabilize a failing coolant line. Priya's voice cracked slightly as she reported falling numbers across nearly every system. Reyes remained still, watching the chaos with tired but steady eyes. He had commanded this ship through worse. He knew every creak, every flaw, every stubborn piece of machinery that refused to quit even when it should have. Hold the line, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. We've survived worse. Above them, Rill stared at the battlefield, utterly certain of his fleet's superior numbers and technology, yet completely unable to explain why one crippled, aging human warship refused to fall. Smoke drifted through the lower corridors of the Ashwood, thick enough that the emergency lights barely cut through it. In one of the narrow maintenance tunnels, a young technician named Grace Whitfield pressed a patch of sealant against a cracked pipe, her hands shaking from exhaustion rather than fear. Around her, the ship groaned like an old animal refusing to lie down. On the bridge, Reyes studied the tactical display, watching red markers representing enemy ships circle around his position. The numbers were not good. 2 of his weapon systems were offline, and the reactor was running hotter than safety protocols allowed. Still, the Ashwood held its position, firing back whenever an opening appeared. Report, Reyes said. Priya's voice was steady despite the strain on her face. Reactor at 81% output climbing. If it goes past 90, we risk a meltdown. Then we don't let it, Reyes said. Reroute non-essential power from decks 4 and 5. On Rill's flagship, the mood was shifting from confidence to confusion. His officers exchanged uncertain glances as another volley failed to bring down the human ship's defenses completely. Vesa remained focused on her console, running calculations again and again, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Commander, she said, their responses don't match any known human ship design. I checked our records. This class of vessel should have failed structurally after the second wave. Rill's antennae twitched with irritation, and yet it hasn't. I don't think it's the ship, Vesa said carefully. I think it's the crew. Every adjustment they make happens faster than automated systems should allow. They're compensating manually in real time under fire. Rill said nothing for a moment, considering her words. In his long career, he had fought many enemies, most of whom relied heavily on advanced automation. The idea of a crew manually overriding failing systems mid-battle without panic was unfamiliar to him. Focus fire on their primary reactor, he ordered. If their systems are as unstable as you suggest, a direct hit should end this quickly. The next assault came without warning. A concentrated beam struck the Ashwood's underside, tearing through 2 decks and cutting off communication with a small maintenance team. Reyes felt the impact through the floor itself, more than heard it. Deck 7, Priya said, her voice tightening. We've lost contact. Fire suppression system failed. Reyes clenched his jaw but kept his voice level. Get emergency teams moving. Owen, can you reroute auxiliary power to seal that section? Down in engineering, Owen Baxter wiped sweat from his forehead and worked quickly at an open panel, ignoring the sparks flying near his hands. Working on it, Captain. Give me 2 minutes. "You have one," Reyes replied. The ship shuddered again as another volley struck its side. Warning alarms blared through every corridor. Yet despite the damage, despite the fires and cracked hull plating, the crew moved with practiced discipline. No one screamed. No one froze. Every person aboard the Ashwood had trained for exactly this kind of crisis, and now that training carried them through it. Back on the Coalition flagship, frustration grew among Rill's officers. One of his tactical commanders, a broad-shouldered alien named Dressa, stepped forward. "Commander, we are losing efficiency with each passing minute. Shall I order a full-strength barrage?" Rill considered the suggestion, then shook his head slowly. "No, a ship that refuses to break under calculated pressure may break under panic. Continue precision strikes. Force them to make mistakes." Vesa, listening nearby, frowned at this reasoning. She had begun reading through old historical records about humans, gathered from previous encounters and captured data. What she found unsettled her in ways she hadn't expected. Humans, according to these records, rarely broke under pressure. If anything, resistance seemed to increase the longer a battle lasted. She approached Rill quietly. "Commander, may I share something?" He nodded, still watching the battle unfold. "Their historical pattern suggests something troubling," Vesa said. "When humans face overwhelming odds, they don't retreat as often as expected. Many records show increased resistance under prolonged combat, not decreased resistance." Rill's expression remained unreadable, though his antennae twitched again. "You believe this ship will not surrender?" "I believe," Vesa said carefully, "that we may be underestimating something other than their technology." Rill turned back to the viewscreen, watching as the Ashwood continued firing despite visible damage across its hull. Sparks and debris drifted around the ship like a wounded creature refusing to stop moving. Meanwhile, aboard the Ashwood, Reyes received word that the fire on Deck 7 had been contained, though at the cost of 2 more non-essential systems. Casualties were being reported, though he pushed the grief aside for now, knowing there would be time to feel it later, if there was a later. "Captain," Priya said quietly, "reactors stabilizing, but we've lost 30% of our weapons capacity." Reyes exhaled slowly. "Then we make the 70% count." He looked around the bridge at his crew, each of them exhausted, injured in small ways, yet still working without hesitation. There was no secret weapon aboard the Ashwood, no hidden advantage in technology. There was only stubbornness, training, and the refusal to give the enemy an easy victory. Above them, Rill watched his sensors with growing unease, unable to explain why, despite every advantage his fleet possessed, the human ship below continued to resist. The silence after the last strike was the worst part. For a few seconds, nothing moved on the Ashwood's bridge except drifting smoke and the faint hum of overworked systems. Then the alarm started again, and the silence broke into chaos once more. Reyes gripped the console, watching the tactical display flicker as more red markers repositioned around his ship. The Coalition fleet had shifted its formation, focusing fire on the Ashwood's engine section. Explosions rippled along the aft hull, and the ship lurched violently to one side. "Engines are down to 20%, Priya reported, her voice hoarse from shouting orders through the chaos. "We've lost maneuvering thrusters completely." "Then we hold position and keep firing," Reyes said. "Owen, status on the coolant lines." Down in engineering, Owen Baxter was covered in soot, working alongside 2 younger crew members to stabilize a damaged coolant regulator. "Barely holding, Captain. If we lose this line, the reactor cooks itself in under 10 minutes. "Then don't lose it," Reyes said simply. The ship rocked again as another strike tore through the outer hull near the cargo bay. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, cutting off 2 more sections from the rest of the ship. Somewhere in those sealed decks, crew members were trapped, their fate unknown for now. On the Coalition flagship, Rill studied the battle with a mixture of frustration and reluctant respect. His fleet had scored significant damage, yet the Ashwood continued to function, continued to fight, and continued to defy every prediction his officers had made. "Their engines are crippled," Dressa reported. "They cannot retreat now, even if they wanted to." "They never wanted to," Vesa said quietly from her station. She had been watching the pattern of the Ashwood's remaining fire and noticed something remarkable. Despite catastrophic damage, its point defense systems were becoming more accurate, not less. "Explain," Rill said. "Someone is manually adjusting their targeting systems," Vesa said. "Their accuracy has increased by nearly 18% since their automated systems failed. That should be impossible without advanced computing support." Down in the Ashwood's gunnery section, a broad-shouldered officer named Owen's cousin. No, correcting herself internally. The woman working the manual targeting controls was actually a gunner named Hallie Ruiz, sweat dripping down her face as she tracked incoming missiles by hand, firing short, precise bursts from the remaining point defense cannons. She had trained for years on manual override systems, mostly as a backup skill few ever expected to use. Today, that backup skill was keeping the ship alive. "Splash 2, she muttered, watching another incoming missile detonate harmlessly in space. "Come on, just a few more." Reyes glanced toward her station, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement before returning his attention to the main display. He knew every person on this crew by name, knew their strengths, their fears, and their limits. Today, everyone was being pushed far past those limits, yet none of them faltered. "Captain," Priya said suddenly, picking up a transmission request from the Coalition fleet. Reyes frowned. "Direct channel." "Yes, sir, Commander Rill himself." Reyes considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Open it." The main screen flickered, revealing the image of Rill standing calmly on his own bridge, his expression unreadable to human eyes, though his posture suggested calculated confidence. "Captain Reyes," Rill said, his translated voice smooth and measured. "Your vessel is severely damaged. Your engines are gone. Your weapons are failing. Further resistance serves no purpose beyond additional casualties among your crew." Reyes studied the alien commander for a long moment before responding. "You have your numbers, Commander. I have mine. Mine says my crew is still standing, still fighting, and still following orders. That number matters more to me than yours." Rill tilted his head slightly, a gesture Vesa had noted before as a sign of genuine curiosity among their species. "You call this defiance wisdom?" "I call it duty," Reyes replied. "You attacked an outpost full of civilians. We stood between you and them. That hasn't changed just because our engines are gone." For a brief moment, something shifted in Rill's expression, though it was gone before anyone could identify it clearly. "You will lose this fight, Captain." "Maybe," Reyes said, "but it'll cost you more than you planned for." The transmission ended abruptly as Reyes cut the channel himself, unwilling to give the enemy commander the satisfaction of a longer negotiation. He turned back to his crew, all of them watching him with a mixture of exhaustion and quiet determination. "All right," Reyes said. "They're not backing down and neither are we. Everyone stay sharp. We're not done yet." On the Coalition flagship, Rill remained silent for a long moment after the channel closed, considering the human captain's words carefully. Beside him, Vesa spoke quietly. "Commander, I don't think they're going to surrender, no matter how much damage we cause." Rill turned to her, his usual confidence tempered by something closer to uncertainty. "Then we will have to force the issue further." He ordered the fleet to resume its assault, focusing fire once more on the Ashwood's remaining defenses, determined to end this battle no matter the cost, even as doubt began to creep into his calculations for the first time in his long career. A single emergency light flickered above the sealed door on Deck 7, casting broken shadows across the twisted metal. Behind that door, 3 crew members waited quietly in the dark, rationing air and listening to the distant sound of battle through the hull. They had been trapped for almost an hour, yet none of them panicked. They trusted the ship, and more importantly, they trusted their captain to keep fighting until help arrived or the battle ended. On the bridge, Rays received updates in short, clipped reports from every station, each one a small piece of a larger picture that grew grimmer by the minute. Despite this, his voice remained steady, refusing to let exhaustion or fear creep into his tone. "Status on weapons," he said. 40% capacity, Priya answered. "We're rationing power between shields and offense now. Can't hold both at full strength much longer." Rays nodded slowly, processing the information without visible reaction. "Then we choose our shots carefully." Above the battle, Rill watched the Ashwood's continued resistance with growing unease. His fleet had sustained more damage than expected. 2 of his escort ships now drifting with disabled systems after the human crew's manual targeting proved far more effective than predicted. Vesa approached him again, her expression more serious than before. "Commander, I've been reviewing historical combat data from previous human engagements across multiple fronts. There's a pattern I think you should see." Rill gestured for her to continue. "Humans rarely surrender based on damage assessments alone," Vesa explained. "Their decision to continue fighting seems tied to something less measurable, something more like belief or purpose. In nearly every recorded case, human crews fought hardest not when winning, but when protecting something they valued." Rill considered this carefully. "And what does this ship value enough to die for?" Vesa checked her data again. "According to intercepted transmissions before the battle began, this outpost includes civilian refugees, families relocated after previous conflicts. This ship isn't defending strategic territory, Commander. It's defending people." For a long moment, Rill said nothing, staring at the tactical display where the Ashwood continued firing despite catastrophic damage. In his long career, he had fought wars over resources, territory, and political dominance. The idea of an entire crew willingly sacrificing themselves purely to protect civilians without any strategic gain was foreign to him. He opened a private channel to Rays once more, curiosity outweighing his earlier frustration. "Captain Rays," Rill said as the connection opened, "explain something to me." Rays glanced toward the screen, his expression tired but calm. "I'm a little busy, Commander." "Indulge me," Rill said. "Your ship gains nothing strategically by continuing this fight. Your survival probability decreases with each passing minute, yet your resistance increases. Why?" Rays was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Because giving up doesn't fix anything," he said finally. "History's taught us that much. Every time we've faced something bigger than us, quitting never made it smaller. Fighting, even when it's hopeless, has ended more wars than surrendering ever did." "That is not logical," Rill said. "No," Rays agreed. "It's not, but it's honest." Rill studied the human captain's face, searching for some sign of deception or bravado, finding none. "Your crew knew the odds before this battle began." "Every one of them," Rays said, "and they chose to stay anyway." The channel remained open a moment longer, neither commander speaking, before Rays finally closed it himself, returning his focus to the battle unfolding around him. Back on the Coalition flagship, Rill sat in contemplative silence, processing what he had just heard. Vesa watched him carefully, sensing the shift in her commander's demeanor. "Commander," she said quietly, "if their resistance is tied to values beyond survival, continued bombardment may not force their surrender at all. It may only strengthen their resolve." Rill exhaled slowly, an old gesture among his people signaling deep thought. "Then what do you suggest, Vesa?" "I don't know," she admitted. "This is unlike anything in our records. Perhaps understanding them requires more than tactical analysis." Rill rose from his seat, moving toward the viewport overlooking the battle. Below him, the ashwood continued to burn and smoke, yet remained intact, firing back whenever an opening allowed. Despite every advantage his fleet possessed, this single, crippled human ship refused to yield. "Resume the attack," Rill said finally, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "But target only their remaining weapon systems. I want them disabled, not destroyed." Dressa, standing nearby, frowned slightly. "Commander, this hesitation is costing us efficiency." "Perhaps," Rill said, "but destroying something we don't understand rarely leads to useful conclusions." As the coalition fleet resumed its assault, the ashwood shuddered under renewed fire, sparks flying from damaged panels across every deck. Yet through the chaos, Reyes remained steady, guiding his crew through each new crisis with quiet determination, refusing to let exhaustion or fear dictate their next move. Somewhere deep within the ship, Halle Ruiz continued her manual defense against incoming fire, her hands steady despite hours of continuous strain. Around her, the crew worked in coordinated desperation, holding their ship together through sheer will alone, unaware that above them, an alien commander was beginning to question everything he thought he understood about the enemy he faced. Somewhere below the battle, on the surface of the fatting outpost, a group of refugees huddled inside a reinforced shelter, watching flashes of light streak across the sky through a small viewport. Among them was an elderly woman named Marion Holt, who had lived through 3 wars already and recognized the sound of a losing battle. Yet she also recognized something else in the rhythm of the distant explosions, a stubborn defiance that refused to quiet down. "They're still fighting," she said softly to the children beside her. "As long as we hear that, we're still safe." High above, that stubborn defiance came at a steep cost. The ashwood shook violently as another coalition strike tore through its already weakened hull. Reyes gripped his console tightly, watching as another section of the ship went dark on his display. "Reactor output critical," Priya reported, her voice strained. "If we take one more direct hit near the core, we lose containment." "Then we don't take another hit there," Reyes said, though even he wasn't sure how much longer they could avoid it. On the coalition flagship, Rill watched the battle with a growing sense of unease he had never experienced before in his long career. 2 more of his escort ships had sustained heavy damage, one drifting uselessly after a well-placed strike ruptured its power core entirely. His officers exchanged uncertain glances, sensing the shift in momentum despite their numerical advantage. "Commander," Dressa said, "our losses are mounting faster than projected. Shall I recall the damaged vessels?" Rill hesitated, watching the tactical display where the crippled ashwood continued firing despite overwhelming odds. Something about the ship's persistence gnawed at him, a question he could not fully answer through logic alone. "No," he said finally, "we finish this." Vesa, standing nearby, spoke up cautiously. "Commander, if I may, continuing this assault is proving costly beyond initial projections. Perhaps a tactical withdrawal." "This is not about tactics anymore," Rill interrupted, his voice sharper than usual. "This ship should have fallen hours ago. I intend to understand why it hasn't." Down on the ashwood, Owen Baxter stumbled out of engineering, his uniform singed, and his hands blistered from hours of manual repairs. He made his way toward the bridge, reporting directly to Reyes despite his exhaustion. "Captain, the reactor's stable for now, but we're running on fumes. Another direct hit near the core and we're finished." Reyes nodded grimly, absorbing the information without visible reaction. "Understood. Get some rest if you can, Owen. You've earned it." Owen managed a tired smile. "Rest sounds nice, Captain. Ask me again when this is over." As Owen left, Priya turned to Reyes, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and quiet determination. "Captain, I sent an emergency distress signal 3 hours ago, before our long-range communications went offline. If reinforcements are coming, they should be close." Should be, Reyes repeated softly. Let's hope should is enough. The battle raged on, each passing minute bringing fresh damage to both sides. Halle Ruiz continued her manual defense against incoming missiles, her movements growing slower with fatigue, yet still precise enough to intercept most incoming threats. Around her, the crew worked in tired unison, holding the ship together through sheer stubbornness alone. On the Coalition flagship, tension grew as more reports of damage filtered in from across the fleet. Rill remained focused on the Ashwood, watching as it continued its defiant resistance despite catastrophic damage across nearly every system. "Commander," Vesa said suddenly, checking her console. "I'm detecting new contacts approaching from the outer system, multiple signatures moving fast." Rill's antennae twitched sharply. "Identify them." Vesa's fingers moved quickly across her controls. Human design. Small vessels, likely a rapid response fleet from a nearby colony. Estimated arrival 6 minutes. Dressa stepped forward immediately. "Commander, if reinforcements arrive while we're still engaged here, we risk being caught between two fronts." Rill considered this new development carefully, weighing the cost of continuing against the growing risk of remaining in place. Despite every tactical advantage his fleet possessed at the start of this battle, the situation had shifted dramatically, and not in his favor. Aboard the Ashwood, Reyes received the same news through a garbled but readable transmission burst. His tired eyes brightened slightly for the first time in hours. "Captain," Priya said, barely containing her relief, "reinforcements inbound, 6 minutes." Reyes allowed himself a small, exhausted smile. "Then we hold for 6 more minutes." He turned to address his crew, his voice carrying across the battered bridge despite the noise of alarms and creaking metal. "Everyone, listen up. Help is coming. We've held this line through everything they've thrown at us and we're not stopping now. 6 minutes. That's all we need." The crew, exhausted but resolute, straightened at his words, finding renewed determination despite their fatigue. Halle adjusted her aim once more, ready to intercept whatever came next. Down in engineering, Owen returned to his post despite Reyes' earlier suggestion to rest, unwilling to leave his ship's fate to anyone else. Above them, Rill weighed his options carefully, watching both the crippled but defiant Ashwood and the approaching reinforcements on his sensors. For the first time since the battle began, doubt outweighed his confidence entirely, and he understood that this engagement was no longer unfolding the way he had planned. 6 minutes felt longer than 6 hours to the crew of the Ashwood. Every second stretched out under the weight of failing systems and mounting damage, yet the ship held together, refusing to give the Coalition fleet the satisfaction of an easy victory. On the bridge, Reyes watched the countdown on his display, willing it forward through sheer determination alone. 3 minutes, Priya announced, her voice hoarse but steady. The Coalition fleet, aware now of the approaching reinforcements, adjusted its formation. Rill stood at the center of his flagship's bridge, weighing his options with growing urgency. His fleet had already sustained heavier losses than expected from a single crippled ship, and now a second force approached from the outer system. "Commander," Dressa said, "orders." Rill studied the tactical display for a long moment before responding. "Concentrate remaining fire on the Ashwood's weapon systems. If we can neutralize their offense before reinforcements arrive, we still hold the advantage." The Coalition ships surged forward, unleashing a final concentrated assault against the battered human vessel. The Ashwood shook violently under the impact, alarms blaring through every corridor as multiple systems failed simultaneously. Sparks rained down across the bridge, and several crew members were thrown from their stations. "Weapons at 15%, Priya reported, struggling to remain upright. "Shields failing on the port side." Reyes gripped his console tightly, refusing to let the chaos shake his focus. "Redirect everything we have left to point defense. Protect the hull as long as possible." Down in the gunnery section, Hallie Ruiz fired the last functioning cannon manually, picking off incoming projectiles one by one despite her trembling hands. Around her, sparks and debris fell from damaged panels, yet she remained focused, refusing to let exhaustion slow her reactions. "1 minute," Priya called out, her voice barely audible over the alarms. The coalition fleet pressed harder, sensing an opportunity to finish the battle before reinforcements could interfere. Rill watched closely, his usual calm replaced by tense anticipation as his ships closed in for what he hoped would be a decisive final strike. Then, without warning, new signatures appeared on coalition sensors, moving fast and striking with precision. The human reinforcement fleet arrived exactly on time, catching several coalition vessels off guard as they focused entirely on finishing the Ashwood. Explosions bloomed across space as smaller, faster human ships engaged the already weakened coalition fleet from multiple angles. "Multiple contacts," Dressa shouted. "They're engaging directly." Rill's calm finally broke as chaos spread across his own tactical display. Ships that had focused entirely on destroying the Ashwood now found themselves caught between two fronts, unable to defend against the sudden and coordinated assault. Aboard the Ashwood, cheers erupted across the battered bridge as the reinforcement fleet engaged the enemy. Reyes allowed himself a brief moment of relief, watching as the tide of battle shifted for the first time since the engagement began. "Captain," Priya said, disbelief evident in her exhausted voice, "they made it." Reyes nodded slowly, though his expression remained cautious. "Not over yet. Keep our defenses up as long as we can." On the coalition flagship, Rill watched his fleet's formation collapse into disarray, unable to reconcile how a single crippled human ship had held out long enough for reinforcements to arrive. His officers looked to him for orders, uncertainty evident across the bridge. "Commander," Vesa said quietly, "further engagement risks losing additional ships. I recommend immediate withdrawal." Rill remained silent for a long moment, staring at the wounded but still functioning Ashwood on his display. Despite every calculated advantage his fleet had possessed at the start of this battle, one stubborn ship and its exhausted crew had turned the entire engagement on its head. "Order the fleet to withdraw," Rill said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "We're finished here." As coalition ships began retreating into jump space, Vesa remained at her station, watching the Ashwood's battered form on her sensors. Smoke still poured from several sections, yet the ship remained intact, defiant even in its ruined state. She made a quiet note in her personal log, unrelated to official reports. "I no longer believe this was about their technology," she wrote. "I believe it was something else entirely, something we may never fully understand." Aboard the Ashwood, the crew began the slow process of assessing damage and treating the wounded as the last coalition ships vanished from sensors. Reyes finally allowed himself to sit down, exhaustion settling over him now that the immediate danger had passed. Priya approached quietly, offering him a data pad with updated damage reports. "We lost 12 crew members, Captain, many more injured." Reyes closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of that number before responding. "Make sure their names are recorded properly, every one of them." "Yes, sir." He looked around the battered bridge, at the scorched panels and exhausted faces of his surviving crew, each of them having given everything to hold the line against impossible odds. Owen limped onto the bridge, exhausted but alive, offering a tired thumbs up toward his captain. "She held together, Captain," Owen said, "just like you said she would." Reyes managed a faint smile despite his exhaustion. She didn't do it alone. Below, on the surface of the outpost, Marion Holt stepped outside the shelter with the other refugees, watching the sky where the battle had finally gone silent. Above them, barely visible against the stars, the Ashwood drifted quietly, scarred but unbroken, a stubborn reminder that some things simply refuse to fall, no matter the odds stacked against them. As repairs began aboard the ship, Ray stood at the viewport, watching the stars slowly settle into stillness once more. He did not know what future battles awaited them, but for now his crew was alive, the outpost was safe, and the Ashwood, against every expectation, remained exactly where it had started, unwilling to yield, unwilling to fall.